Her son raised a champagne glass on the guest house deck, 24 hours after his father's funeral. To fresh starts, Jason laughed, clinking glasses with Dana, his wife. From the porch, Meredith Hollowell, his mother, watched in silence. They thought the house, the land, and the legacy were theirs now. They didn't know the trust was never signed, and that the woman they were trying to erase had just reopened the safe. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The laughter didn't match the air. It cut through the late summer hush like a chainsaw in velvet, shrill, entitled Unearned. Meredith Hollowell stood at the edge of her porch barefoot, one hand still clutching the black ribbon that had come undone from the floral wreath on the front door. The other clutched nothing, not her grief, not her anger. Those were already setting like concrete in her chest. The wind carried the echo again. The guest house deck, 70 paces down the gravel path and tucked behind a curtain of hemlocks, shouldn't have felt that close. But it did. She could hear Jason's booming voice, the same one that once hollered for her to come watch him try a flip off the dock, now slurring through a toast she was never meant to hear. To fresh starts, Jason shouted. And future plans, Dana chimed in, the lazy curl of her voice tight with sugar and venom. Meredith stepped off the porch. The gravel was warm beneath her feet, the last of the afternoon sun pressing heat into the mountain stone. No one noticed her coming. The laughter rose again as she cleared the hemlocks. Jason leaned against the deck railing, a bottle of Veuve clutched in his right hand. Dana, barefoot and red-lipped, clinked a coupe glass against his. The guest house, once built as a place for recovering riders and quiet weekends, now bristled with Bluetooth speakers and evidence of entitlement, 2 champagne bottles sweating in a silver ice bucket, charcuterie spread carelessly across a cedar slab, an iPad open to Zillow's luxury renovations page. Dana saw her first. "Oh," she said, startled mid-sip. "Didn't know you were out." Meredith didn't speak. She didn't flinch. She turned, slow and deliberate, and walked back toward the farmhouse. A thistle thorn jabbed into her heel. She didn't blink. Gravel bit into her soles like a dare. Let it hurt, she thought. Let it leave a mark. She reached the front porch and sat. Not on the rocking chair. On the steps low where the weight could settle in her knees and back. A hummingbird hovered near the feeder, wings like tiny turbines, unbothered by the rising tension in the air. That night the guest house lights stayed on too long. Their laughter warped into drunken argument, then sudden silence. By 11:42 p.m., only the crickets dared speak. At 11:43, Carson knocked on the kitchen door. Meredith opened it to find him standing there, hoodie pulled tight, hair still damp from his shower. "They think it's theirs now," he said, voice low, matter of fact. She studied him. Dana's boy. But something else entirely. His eyes held no greed, no angle, just awareness, and maybe sorrow. Meredith turned to the table, flipped open her leather-bound notebook, and clicked her pen. She wrote, August 30, 11:43 p.m. Disrespect. Phase 1. Carson leaned against the counter. "You gonna let him?" Meredith didn't look up. No, that was all. When the house was quiet and the air cooler, she climbed the stairs and walked into the bedroom she no longer shared. Her husband's absence was loud here, in the neatly folded quilt at the end of the bed, in the half-empty dresser drawer he never got around to filling again. The safe was behind the wardrobe, bolted into the wall frame. She knelt, pressed her palm flat against the cool steel, and turned the dial like she had 2,000 times before. The sound of tumblers falling into place filled the room with quiet intention. Click. She pulled the door open and reached inside, past the bank envelopes, the birth certificates, and the pearl brooch she hadn't worn since Reagan was in office. Her fingers found the manila envelope. She brought it to the bed, flipped on the lamp, and unfolded the contents. There it was. The original trust, unsigned, unwitnessed, unfinalized. The version that Jason and Dana never knew existed. the one that kept everything in Meredith's name until explicit conditions were met, conditions that now, conveniently, never would be. She stared at the old typewritten lines, tracing her husband's familiar phrasing, deliberate as always, ownership to be granted only upon satisfactory evidence of respect, involvement and moral intent toward preservation of the Hollowell legacy. She could hear Jason's toast again. To fresh starts, Meredith smiled. Not yet. The cafe was one of those Asheville hideaways, warm brick walls, long shadows, and an old ceiling fan that creaked like it had secrets of its own. The kind of place where no one looked too closely at papers on a table, or the steel in an older woman's jawline. Meredith slid into the booth across from Delilah Voss, her late husband's sister and the only person alive who knew how far back the family rot went. A waitress dropped off 2 black coffees without being asked. Meredith's cup steamed, like the anger still sitting low in her chest. She pulled the manila envelope from her tote and set it down between them. Delilah glanced at it, then at Meredith. "Tell me that's not what I think it is." Meredith didn't smile. She simply opened the flap, pulled out the crisp, unsigned trust, and laid it flat between the sugar packets and silverware. "They never signed the update," she said. Delilah let out a slow breath, sat back, and studied the document like it had teeth. "Well then," she murmured, "we go back to the old one. Full control?" Meredith asked, voice low. Delilah nodded once. "Every inch, every tree, every gate, latch and gravel path." Outside, a bus rumbled by. Meredith didn't look. "They drank champagne," she said, her voice a notch tighter. "On the Guesthouse deck. Day after the funeral. Called it a fresh start." Delilah's eyes narrowed. "Then let's make it one. Just not for them." Meredith picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in months. Luke Allen. The voice on the other end answered, warm and unmistakable. "It's Meredith," she said. "You still have that copy of the deed?" A pause, then always. "And a record of every survey too." "Good," she said. "I'll need them." That evening, the sun was dipping low behind the ridgeline, slanting gold across the side of the farmhouse. Meredith stood at the kitchen counter, slowly slicing a lemon for tea when Dana walked in, wearing heels too high for gravel and a perfume that belonged in a boutique, not a barn. So Dana began, too casually, leaning on the doorframe like she hadn't nearly cackled her way through her father's wake. "Have you talked to anyone about next steps, with the estate, I mean, timeline-wise?" Meredith squeezed the lemon, juice stinging her paper-cut thumb. She didn't look up. "There isn't one." Dana blinked. "What? There isn't a timeline? Not for you." Her voice was calm, even, not cruel, just done. Dana's lips parted like she might argue, then snapped closed as if remembering her own brittle position. She turned on her heel and walked out without another word, heels snapping across the hardwood. Meredith didn't bother to watch her go. Instead, she reached under the counter and pulled out the leather notebook again. Flipped to the next blank page. August 4th, 6:12 p.m. Disrespect. Phase 2. The next morning, she drove into town again. The county office building sat at the edge of Pack Square, the marble facade dull in the morning fog. She walked in alone, paperwork in hand, and approached the clerk's window. The woman looked up with a practiced smile. "How can I help you, ma'am?" Meredith slid over a neatly clipped bundle, original deed copy, notarized affidavit, and the old trust Delilah had certified overnight. On the top was a new page, reversion of title request. "I need to refile ownership under original intent," Meredith said. "No early heirs. Add a clause stating that notarized this morning." The woman skimmed the first few lines, her expression faltering slightly as she read. "This would exclude." "Yes," Meredith said. "It would." The clerk nodded, her tone shifting to something more respectful. "We can process that today." Meredith signed the line at the bottom without hesitation. Behind her, someone dropped a folder, and a loud thud echoed in the room. Meredith didn't flinch. Her name, and hers alone, was going back where it belonged. The paper was folded once, then again, too precisely. It caught Meredith's eye not because it stood out, but because it tried not to. Hidden halfway down the blue recycling bin outside the mudroom, tucked beneath a flattened cereal box, and yesterday's paper, the edges were too crisp to be trash. She reached in, pulled it free, and unfolded it slowly beneath the morning sun. Hollowell Retreat and Event Venue was scrawled across the top in Jason's handwriting, bold and unearned. Beneath it, floor plans for the Guesthouse expansion, a rendering of an outdoor stage, and projected revenue estimates, scribbled in red ink. At the bottom, a single phrase in parentheses, target summer weddings, leverage family estate optics. Meredith's lips parted, not in shock, but in bitter amusement. No email, no call, no permission, just plans built on the bones of her husband's legacy. She walked back inside, dropped the stack of papers onto the gas stove, struck a match, and lit the corner. The flame rolled across Jason's imagined empire in seconds. She didn't flinch when the edges curled and blackened, didn't turn away when the ash rose toward the vent hood. By the time Dana walked in that afternoon, Meredith was already on her third load of laundry, the smell of burnt paper still faint in the air. "Quick question," Dana said, in that tone that always meant it wasn't. She leaned against the doorframe, fake casual. "Do you mind if I host a little wine circle out on the main deck next weekend? Just a few ladies from the Asheville Club." Meredith looked up from folding a towel. "Only if you sign a lease." Dana blinked. "I what?" Meredith kept folding. "You want to use the deck? Then you're either family or a tenant. Choose one." Dana scoffed, all wounded pride and disbelief. "This is ridiculous." "No," Meredith said, still calm. "What's ridiculous is thinking you can turn grief into profit without asking whose name is on the deed." Dana left without another word. The silence that followed was the most honest thing she'd given in years. Later that week, Meredith called Reverend Luke. She met him at the edge of the property just after sunrise, when the fog still clung to the fence posts like wool. Luke brought the old map, creased, yellowed, and marked with decades of handwritten notes. The two of them walked every inch of boundary, from the split-rail pasture to the stone line near the trout stream, Luke hammering red flags into the soil every 100 feet. "This place," he said, squinting into the sun, "was always yours, Meredith. Hank just held it until you were ready." Meredith nodded once. "I'm ready now." They stopped at the far edge of the Guesthouse slope, where the brush grew thick and wild. Luke pushed aside a curtain of sweetbriar and pointed to a locked steel box half sunken into the ground. "Power junction," he said. Before the Guesthouse had its own panel, this ran straight from the main. Meredith crouched, brushing a palm over the rusted surface. "Still connected?" Luke nodded. "Technically, legally, that's yours." She stared at the box, heart suddenly slow and cold. All those nights Jason left the porch light blazing while he drank through another bottle. All the entitlement, all the noise, all the assuming. "You know you can cut their power from here, right?" Luke asked, tone casual but laced with meaning. Meredith stood, brushing the dirt from her hands. Her eyes didn't leave the box. "I do now." The sound of the tape peeling from the dispenser was sharp in the morning stillness, deliberate, like a blade drawn. Meredith pressed the laminated notice against the Guesthouse door, smoothing it with firm, steady hands. Her breath fogged the plastic as she leaned in close enough to read her own words one last time. "Notice to occupants, proof of valid lease agreement required within 14 days. Failure to comply will result in formal eviction proceedings." Signed neatly at the bottom, Meredith Hollowell, property owner. She stepped back, let the mountain breeze settle the moment, then turned and walked away. Not hurried, not smug, but unshakable. Gravel crunched beneath her boots like applause. It didn't take long. From inside the Guesthouse, a screech shattered the silence. "What the actual hell is this?" Dana's voice tore through the air, followed by the slam of a screen door, and the rapid fire of expensive sandals stomping across the deck. Jason emerged seconds later, shirtless, holding a mug that likely hadn't seen coffee in days. He yanked the notice off the door with two sharp tugs, and crumpled it in his fist. What is this supposed to be? A joke? Meredith didn't even pause on the path. No joke, she called over her shoulder. A line. You crossed it. Mom, Jason shouted, following a few steps. This isn't how families handle grief. Meredith stopped, turned. Her voice dropped to a low, even register. You didn't grieve. You drank and schemed. You're being petty. No, she said, taking a step closer. I'm being legal. Jason scoffed, but she didn't miss the twitch in his jaw. By the time the sun reached the high point of the afternoon, 2 more laminated notices were up. One on the back door, one inside the screen of the porch entry. This time Meredith used industrial staples. Delilah filed the same letter with the Buncombe County Recorder's Office before dinner, with an affidavit of property ownership and a time-stamped photograph. She texted Meredith a thumbs-up emoji and nothing else. At the dining room table, Carson pushed his mashed potatoes around with the back of his fork before looking up and meeting his grandmother's eyes. They'll never see you coming, he said quietly. Meredith only nodded. The next morning, Jason cornered her on the porch while she was watering the hanging petunias. You know what this looks like, right? He snapped. You alone in a big house, coming unhinged, trying to punish us because you miss him. Meredith didn't respond. She turned the hose, watched the stream arc in the morning light. Jason's tone rose. You're just bitter and alone. She shut off the hose. And still on the deed. He flinched, just enough for her to catch it. That evening, Meredith found Dana sitting on the swing in the side garden, arms crossed, face tight with performative hurt. I just wanted one peaceful summer here, she muttered. Meredith didn't stop walking. Then you should have acted like you belonged here. The next day, Delilah walked into the county clerk's office, wearing heels sharp enough to draw blood and a tailored navy suit that said, I don't lose. She placed a folder on the desk, opened it to a page marked Cease and Desist, unauthorized commercial use of family name. Inside were screenshots of Jason's website draft for Hollowell retreat and event venue, a list of vendor inquiries he'd sent, and an LLC application submitted to the Secretary of State, all without her permission, all under a name that no longer belonged to him. The clerk raised her eyebrows. You're asking us to block use of the surname, of the Hollowell name in any commercial application not filed by Meredith Hollowell, or her legal designee, Delilah said crisply. Effective immediately. The paperwork slid into the intake tray. Back at the farmhouse, Meredith poured herself a glass of iced tea and stood by the window, watching the guest house windows glow like a ship too close to sinking. Delilah wasn't a woman who swore often, but when she opened the envelope from the county registrar's office and saw the amendment, she muttered a sharp hell no, right there in the courthouse parking lot, her heels grinding into asphalt as if she could crush the audacity beneath her shoes. She called Meredith before she even started the car. There's a new filing, Delilah said, voice clipped. Dated 2 months before Hank passed. It claims Jason was added to the deed. Meredith didn't answer right away. The silence was cold and clean. Send it, she finally said. Every page. 10 minutes later, Meredith sat at the farmhouse kitchen table, hands flat beside a manila folder she labeled in bold black marker, Fraud Attempt, J.H. The pages stared up at her, full of forged bravado, her husband's signature too perfect. A notary stamp that didn't match their known notary's records, and in the witness line, Dana's name in lazy cursive. So that's what the champagne had really been for. She called her attorney, Janet Morales, and read every line aloud. We go to court, Janet said. And we don't blink. 2 mornings later, Meredith walked through the doors of the Buncombe County Courthouse, dressed in dark gray wool, buttoned to the collarbone. Her boots echoed off the tile like a warning. Delilah walked beside her, silent but certain. Jason was already inside the courtroom, sitting beside a lawyer who looked too young and too uncomfortable to be defending a man with that much neck sweat. Dana sat behind them, oversized sunglasses on indoors like grief camouflage. She didn't speak, didn't meet Meredith's eyes. The judge, a stern woman with Appalachian roots and a mouth that didn't curve unless amused, called the session to order. Janet stood first. Your Honor, we are submitting evidence that the amendment to the Hollowell property deed is fraudulent. The signature attributed to the late Hank Hollowell is not verifiable. The notary stamp is unregistered, and the witness listed is Miss Dana Hollowell, who we believe knowingly participated in this deception. Jason's lawyer objected. The judge waved him down. I'd like to hear from someone who knew the decedent well, she said. Someone who can speak to his intent. Reverend Luke rose from the gallery, straight-backed in his Sunday suit, hat clutched in both hands like a holy artifact. Hank Hollowell told me. More than once, he wanted Meredith to have full say over the land, until her last breath, if possible, he said. He never once said he'd add Jason. In fact, he paused, eyes cutting to Jason. He asked me to make sure he didn't. Jason shifted in his chair, jaw clenching. The judge turned to Dana. Miss Hollowell, you witnessed this amendment. Dana crossed her legs. I don't remember signing anything. It could have been, clerk. The judge interrupted. Pull up signature records. Compare to DMV. A pause. Typing. Then the clerk stood. Matches. Dana swallowed visibly. The judge leaned forward, her voice level. The law does not tolerate tampering with property records, especially posthumously. This amendment is nullified. Stricken from record. Jason half rose. This is insane. He was going to do. The judge cut him off. Sit down, Mr. Hollowell. You are lucky we're not escalating this to criminal court. Janet stood again. Your Honor, we request a protective filing, to prevent any future title actions from these parties. Granted, the judge said. A single bang of the gavel. Outside the courthouse, sunlight spilled across the steps. Meredith stood still. The folder now marked results. Delilah slipped her sunglasses on and exhaled. Want to go get coffee? She asked. No, Meredith said. I want to go home. My home. Back at the farmhouse, Carson sat on the porch rail, sketching the tree line. He looked up as Meredith pulled in. How'd it go? She handed him the folder. No more pretending. Carson flipped through it. Slow. You won? I buried the lie next to the man they tried to rewrite. It took Meredith exactly 47 seconds to shut the lights off on their entitlement. The steel lid of the utility box groaned as she opened it, the hinges protesting years of Appalachian rain and neglect. Inside, the main breaker switch for the guest house sat waiting, an obsolete remnant Jason never thought she'd find. Meredith wrapped one gloved hand around it, braced herself against the mountain clay with the other, and pulled. Click. A deep silence rolled out from the box, almost sacred. She locked the lid with a rust-proof padlock, pocketed the key, and stood up as wind rustled the trees behind her like applause from the land itself. By the time she made it back to the farmhouse, Dana's shriek was already echoing across the yard. You've got to be kidding me. My phone won't charge. The router's out, are you insane? Lights blinked frantically inside the guest house, the last of the backup battery flickering through the windows like a dying pulse. Meredith didn't bother responding. She set the kettle on the stove, lit the burner, and waited. Across the gravel path, Dana burst out onto the porch barefoot, phone in hand. She flipped the front-facing camera on and began broadcasting live. She's gone full psycho, Dana said, angling the phone so the farmhouse glowed dimly behind her like a villain's lair. I'm standing in the dark because my mother, yes, the grieving widow, cut our power in August heat. This is elder abuse. If I were elderly. From inside the main house, Carson watched silently. Then, without a word, he grabbed the old Coleman lantern from the mudroom and walked it across the lawn. He handed it to his mother without making eye contact. Dana blinked at him. That's it? He nodded once. Try not to spill it. It runs hot. Then he turned and walked away, straight into the main house, shutting the door behind him. Meredith handed him a folded blanket at the top of the stairs, and he disappeared into the spare bedroom without another word. The next morning, Jason stormed into the farmhouse, as if he still had legal footing. Meredith met him in the front room, calm and waiting, a manila folder already open on the table. I'm suing, he snapped. Interference with utilities, harassment. Unlawful eviction. You're trespassing, Meredith said coolly, sliding a paper toward him across the table. Jason glanced at it, then back up. What is this? Property access limitation form. You were served notice. Twice. You have no legal right to stay in the guest house or modify it. You have no lease. You're not even a named dependent anymore. Jason's jaw twitched. You don't have the authority. I do, she cut in. And if you'd bothered to read the updated trust language, you'd already know that. He stood there for a moment, fists balled, red crawling up his neck like a sunburn he couldn't shake. The door creaked behind them. Reverend Luke stepped in, hat in hand, and nodded at Meredith. I figured I'd back her up, he said, since I was there when Hank made the original plans. Jason's nostrils flared. You've always taken her side. Luke chuckled softly. I've taken the land's side. You just keep forgetting it doesn't belong to you. And the guest house? Jason asked, desperate for a foothold. Luke tilted his head. Never permitted for separate utilities. It's piggybacked on the main house. Always was. Always will be. Legally, Meredith just turned off her own power. Jason looked ready to explode. Later that afternoon, Meredith walked into the County Power Co-op building in town. The air smelled like plastic laminate and faded carpet. Tina, the front clerk, looked up from behind the desk and smiled wide. Hey hon, got a usage report? Meredith handed over the printed breakdown of the last 6 months, high spikes every week in the guest house column. Tina skimmed it, then nodded. All still under your name. They didn't even try to transfer. You want a shut-off record filed with the county? Yes, Meredith said. Tina clicked her keyboard. Done. Meredith turned to go, then paused. Oh, and Tina, she said, voice just above a whisper. Start the paperwork for the water line too. Tina smiled. Thought you'd ask. The wrench turned with a hollow final groan, a sound that echoed across the guest house yard like the tightening of a noose. Meredith stood with her arms folded, sunlight skimming the edge of her linen sleeves as the plumber wiped sweat from his brow. That's it, he said. Disconnected at the main valve. Tanks drained. No more flow to that structure unless someone rewires and reroutes the whole system. Leave the spigot capped, Meredith replied, eyes fixed on the dry gravel below. I want it visible. Let them stare at the consequences. The plumber nodded, tossed his tools into the truck bed, and left with nothing more than a respectful tip of the hat. Meredith remained by the barn, watching the dust settle behind his taillights as the summer heat rose in shimmering waves. Back at the guest house, the silence cracked wide open. Dana's shriek erupted moments later, shrill, breathless, and nearly feral. The back door slammed against the siding as she came stomping out barefoot in nothing but a hotel white robe, soaked and clinging to her frame. Her mascara streaked down both cheeks like melted ink. She marched straight toward the farmhouse, one fist clenched, the other holding a dripping loofah like a weapon. What the hell? Meredith didn't flinch. She was already waiting in the kitchen, calm and prepared, a towel neatly folded on the counter. She handed it to Dana without ceremony. You're wet, she said. Dry off before you ruin the floors. Dana yanked the towel from her hand. You shut off the water. My shower went ice cold halfway through shampooing. I almost slipped and cracked my damn neck. Meredith's tone didn't change. Tenants pay for water. You're not on the lease. Dana blinked, stunned, water dripping from her elbow onto the hardwood. You're seriously doing this, cutting off basic living needs. Not basic, Meredith said. Not when you're trespassing. Dana laughed, a hollow, panicked thing. You're insane. You know that. You're going to get sued. Try, Meredith replied. And try Jason did. He roared down the gravel driveway in his Range Rover 20 minutes later, slamming the door with enough force to send a bird fleeing from the orchard. He didn't even knock, just barreled into the house and demanded to know what the hell kind of game she was playing. Meredith handed him a list. No lease, no authorization, no utilities in your name. And now, thanks to your attempt at filing fraudulent paperwork, no standing with the county either. Jason sneered. I'll file a claim anyway. He did. He drove into town, stormed into the civil court office, and was promptly told that due to the restraining order on property actions filed after the last hearing, no claims or filings would be accepted under his name without judicial approval. He called Dana from the courthouse steps. "They won't take it." Dana's voice cracked on the other end. "She left me with half-rinsed conditioner and no water pressure." "Welcome to hell," Jason muttered, shoving his phone back into his pocket. Meanwhile, Delilah was already one step ahead. By mid-afternoon, she had logged into the estate portal and updated the Hollowell file. With 2 clicks and a notarized digital submission, she changed the status on both Jason and Dana to no authorized occupancy, no dependent status. Later that evening, Meredith made the walk across the path with quiet precision. She carried 2 5-gallon water jugs, one in each hand, and placed them gently by the front steps of the guest house. Carson sat on the porch rail, arms folded, watching her. "I'm not cruel," she said without looking up. "Just done." He nodded. "Slow. You always said fairness wasn't the same as forgiveness." Meredith looked up at him then, catching something new in his eyes, a deeper weight, a growing understanding. He paused. "If they leave," she stilled. "Do I still get to stay?" The locksmith arrived at sunrise. No fanfare, no questions, just a quiet man with a set of drills, a bundle of deadbolts, and the kind of calm you only find in someone used to changing access. Meredith met him at the barn, keyring already in hand. The dew on the grass soaked through her boots as she led him shed by shed, lock by lock, gesture by gesture. There were no speeches, no explanations, only the sound of tumblers being replaced. Old security codes swapped for new ones, each one sealing off history like a stitched wound. By noon, the outbuildings were secured. The tool shed, the feed room, the tack barn, even though no horses had lived there in years. She hadn't planned on locking the greenhouse, but something about the way Dana had been leaving wine bottles in the corner made the decision easy. When Jason tried the shed door that afternoon and found his access denied, he banged on it with the side of his fist, shouting, "What the hell is this?" Meredith didn't respond. Instead, she left a cardboard box on the guest house porch marked Jason, tools and Sharpie, everything inside sorted and labeled, drill bits, socket wrench, even the rusted hand saw he'd once borrowed and never returned, all accounted for, all in perfect condition. Just not his to reclaim. An hour later, Dana found her own message. Stacked neatly outside the back door of the guest house sat 3 crates, each one labeled wine, Dana. Every bottle accounted for, not a single cork cracked. Atop the last crate sat a folded linen napkin and a handwritten note. "Storage is not a right, nor is entitlement. Mend." Dana stood on the porch for a full minute, silent. Then, with the sudden violence of someone who knew she was losing ground, she kicked the top crate over, sending a bottle of Merlot rolling into the dirt, cork popping loose with a faint hiss. Carson, sitting on the porch rail across the yard, didn't flinch. He simply took out his phone and sent a single text to his grandmother, visible through the kitchen window. Meredith, who was chopping rosemary at the counter, saw the message and allowed herself a rare smile. That evening, a new notice arrived in the guest house mailbox, sealed, stamped, and cold as stone. "Final notice before eviction filing. Issued by Delilah Voss, acting estate designee. Formal action pending within 72 hours. Jason read it aloud, while Dana paced behind him, chewing her thumbnail. "They can't actually do this, right?" Dana hissed. "We've been here for months. I have clothes and drawers. You built a wine rack." Jason's voice was tighter than usual. "She's doing it. That's the thing." They both turned toward the farmhouse, as if it would suddenly show mercy. It didn't. At dusk, Meredith took one last walk of the land. She did it the way her husband used to. Slow, deliberate, one footstep at a time along the ridgeline, past the orchard, down through the poplar grove, and back around by the fence line. The land was quieter now, calmer. Even the birdsong seemed more settled. She touched every gate latch, every corner post. Reassurance through ritual. By the time she returned to the main house, porch light glowing amber in the deep blue twilight, Dana was already standing at the foot of the steps, fists clenched at her sides. "You can't just erase us," Dana hissed. Meredith paused at the top step. Her voice was soft, firm. "Watch me." The pen didn't tremble in Meredith's hand. It hovered deliberate and still, just above the signature line. The final trust documents lay spread across the notary's desk, like a battlefield map, every paragraph a wound that needed closing. Delilah sat beside her, poised and unreadable in a navy dress and low heels, her reading glasses catching the cold fluorescent light. Across the room, Reverend Luke stood quietly, arms folded, hat in hand, a silent witness to a legacy being rewritten. Meredith signed her name, first on the trust amendment, then on the exclusion clause, finally on the line that transferred the full estate, irrevocably permanently, to one name only: Carson Weiland. Reverend Luke stepped forward, laid his palm on the Bible, and added his signature with a soft scratch of ink. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He tipped his hat toward Meredith, gave Delilah a subtle nod, and walked out into the late morning sun. The door's soft click behind him felt like the closing of a vault. Delilah handed Meredith a sealed envelope containing the final copy. "They're going to lose their minds." Meredith looked down at the document again, then let them back at the estate. The gravel under her tires crunched louder than usual. The mountain wind had picked up, carrying a faint smell of pine sap and tension. Meredith didn't go to the farmhouse first. She went to her writing desk. There, with clean stationery and a pen older than Carson himself, she wrote 2 letters. Each one brief, brutal, and surgical. "Jason, effective immediately. You are no longer tied to this land in any legal capacity. Meredith Dana. Your name has been removed. There will be no inheritance." Meredith. Carson found her sealing the envelopes. "They'll go nuclear." "They already did," Meredith said, pressing the wax seal into place. "This is just paperwork catching up." "Why now?" he asked. She looked at him then, really looked, "Because you paid attention. And they never did." That evening, Tina's old red Jeep bounced up the driveway, letters stacked neatly in her passenger seat. She hopped out in sneakers and her co-op polo and handed them over with a conspiratorial smile. "I've been waiting for this day," she said. "Honestly." Meredith chuckled. "Deliver them directly, in hand." Tina winked, with pleasure. She delivered Dana's first. It took less than 2 minutes for the screaming to start. Dana stood on the porch, the envelope torn open like it had personally insulted her. "She can't do this. This land has been Hollowell for generations. You're not on it anymore," Tina said flatly, already walking back to the Jeep. Jason's reaction was quieter, at first. He opened the letter alone, under the oak tree where he used to sneak cigarettes at 17. His jaw twitched, unreadable, as he read the lines. Then he crushed the letter into a tight ball, stormed across the backyard to the fire pit, and dropped it in. The flames leapt high as the paper caught, ink curling, trust unraveling in smoke. He didn't speak, didn't scream, just stared into the blaze with the kind of fury that eats through bone. Across the yard, Meredith sat on the farmhouse porch, tea in hand, shawl draped over her shoulders. She watched the flames calmly, as if watching a final act she'd read too many times before. Carson stood beside her, arms folded. "He burned it," he said. "I know." "What now?" "Now," she said, "it's over for them." Jason stood in the gravel with a phone to his ear, and a scowl carved deep into his face. His breath puffed out in short, angry bursts, as the contractor on the other end spoke. Apologetic, firm and final. "No permit, no build," the man repeated. "County won't sign off. Something about ownership disputes and code violations. I'm not getting involved. Good luck." Click. The line went dead. Jason stared at the unfinished deck behind the guest house, exposed beams jutting out like broken ribs, plywood stacked by the steps, weather warped and useless. What was meant to be a private event terrace now looked like the remains of a failed siege. Dana watched from the patio, cradling a coffee mug, and her pride in equal measure. She didn't say anything until he kicked one of the plywood boards hard enough to splinter it. "She's doing this on purpose," Dana muttered. "You know that, right?" Jason didn't respond. Later that day, Dana took her tantrum to higher ground, specifically, the Asheville Downtown Cafe, where she held court among her socialite friends. Over herbal tea and cloying sympathy, she sobbed into a linen napkin. "She's punishing us," Dana whimpered, "for grieving differently." "Is it grief if you're still waiting on a check?" Meredith asked 2 hours later, when the quote made it back to her through Tina, who happened to be standing in line behind Dana at the cafe. "They didn't grieve," Meredith said simply, pouring herself a cup of black coffee. "They looted." At her request, Reverend Luke met her in the study with a manila envelope labeled, "Property Evidence, Guesthouse." Inside were aerial photos, captured by a surveyor drone during last year's preservation mapping project, that showed the original footprint of the guesthouse, and what it looked like now. The expansion was obvious, unpermitted, and in violation of 3 zoning regulations. "They thought no one was watching," Luke said, flipping through the glossy prints, "but the land sees everything." Meredith nodded, silent. She forwarded the photos to the county inspector's office with one line attached: "Structure expansion without authorization, Hollowell Estate. Current status in legal dispute." It didn't take long. 3 days later, a notice appeared taped to the side of the guesthouse, thick red block letters spelling out "Construction halted, code violation, property owner, under review Jason." Ripped it down and stormed to the farmhouse porch. Meredith met him there, her tea already in hand. "This is harassment," he snarled. "I'm fixing things, I'm trying to make this place better." "You mean more profitable," Meredith said, not even rising from the rocker. Jason pointed to the notice. "This is my future." "No," she interrupted. "It's mine. And you were trespassing when you planned it." That night, Meredith posted a new sign on the split-rail fence, just before the drive curved toward the guest house. "Private property cameras active, no access without written consent by sunrise." Dana had posted a crying selfie online with the caption, "She turned our childhood home into a prison." Meanwhile, Meredith sent the footage from the new porch cameras, which showed Jason hauling lumber past the boundary without permission, directly to the county file clerk. She didn't need revenge. She needed record keeping. The morning after the post went viral in their shallow social circle, a white county sedan pulled up the drive. A man in khakis and a laminated badge stepped out, clipboard in hand. Meredith met him halfway, wiping her hands on her gardening apron. "You must be Mrs. Hollowell." "I am investigating tampering," he said. "Power, water. We had a complaint that connections were disabled intentionally." She tilted her head. "Is that illegal?" "Depends," he said. "Was it your name on the utility account?" Meredith smiled. "Every single one." The inspector didn't flinch. "Mind showing me where the connections were cut?" Meredith stepped aside and gestured toward the path. "Follow me." The county inspector crouched low behind the barn, one gloved hand gripping a muddy section of PVC pipe, while the other steadied his flashlight. "Found it," he called out grimly. Meredith stood a few feet back on the gravel, arms crossed, her face unreadable. The pipe was cheap, slapped together in a rush, a messy T-joint jammed into the main water line that fed the livestock troughs. From it, a thin white hose snaked across the underbrush, partially buried, leading straight toward the guest house. "Unauthorized tap," the inspector confirmed. "No permit, no meter, no record." He looked up at her. "You know who did it?" Meredith didn't answer. She didn't need to. The inspector followed the illegal line until it disappeared beneath the guesthouse foundation. There, he photographed everything, marking timestamps and GPS coordinates. By noon, he'd filed a formal report. By 1:30 p.m., the sheriff was pulling up the driveway. Sheriff Dorsey wasn't a stranger. Meredith had served him coffee during volunteer breakfasts for years, knew his mother's knee had gone bad in 2019, and had once let him borrow her snow chains in a blizzard. He tipped his hat as he stepped out of the cruiser. "Mornin', Meredith. I hate to bring this up to your doorstep, but we got a situation here. I know, she said. They made it. Inside the guest house, Jason and Dana were mid-argument when the knock came. Dana opened the door in oversized sunglasses and a throw blanket like she was shielding herself from the truth. Sheriff Dorsey handed her the notice. What is this? She asked. Voice tight. Tampering with utility infrastructure, he replied. And theft of resources. Jason appeared behind her, shirt half buttoned. That's insane. Dorsey reached for his radio. It's illegal. Dana scoffed. It's a misunderstanding. Meredith stepped forward from the gravel path. It's theft. Jason sneered. You can't prove that. Meredith calmly handed Sheriff Dorsey a folder. Inside, date-stamped photos of the tap line's construction, satellite imagery from Reverend Luke's drone flyover, and 2 screenshots of text messages Jason had sent Carson 6 weeks prior, one of which read, "Don't worry. I'll just pull water off the barn line." Jason paled. Dana opened her mouth, then closed it. "Ma'am," Dorsey said, looking to Meredith, "do you want to press charges?" Delilah answered for her, emerging from her parked car with another folder in hand. Already filed this morning. Theft of utilities, unauthorized structural modification, endangerment of water safety. We're pursuing civil damages. Jason's voice cracked. Civil? For now, Delilah replied. Unless you'd prefer escalation. Dorsey turned toward them both, hands resting lightly on his belt. You're not being arrested, but I am reading you your rights. Dana let out a shaky breath. Jason didn't say a word. Carson, sitting silently on the porch rail, 100 feet away, whispered without looking up from his sketch pad. It's over, isn't it? Meredith watched the sheriff's cruiser roll slowly down the driveway. Almost. That night, the wind shifted. The air grew heavier, like the land itself had taken notice. The guest house remained dark. No laughter, no shouting, only the hollow creak of boards in the wind. Meredith sat on the porch swing, hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile. She didn't need to speak. The silence was her final argument. Then headlights cut across the gravel. The sheriff's cruiser again. He parked slowly, engine idling for a moment before stepping out, hat in hand, envelope in the other. "Evenin', ma'am," he said. "Sorry to be back so soon. What is it?" He offered her the envelope. It was thick. Sealed. Final civil action notice. Filed by the county. The tap line. It broke a few codes we weren't expecting. Meredith took the envelope. Felt the weight of it in her hands. Carson stepped out behind her, tension rising in the quiet. "What kind of notice?" Meredith asked, without flinching. Dorsey hesitated. "One that'll end this, for good." The papers were delivered at 7:14 a.m., just as the sun stretched its fingers across the spine of the Blue Ridge. A plain envelope. No frills, just weight and the law, folded inside. Dana opened it with chipped pink nails and a trembling hand. Jason read over her shoulder, then slammed the screen door hard enough to rattle the guest house siding. 14-day notice to vacate filed under. Unauthorized occupancy property owner. Meredith Hollowell eviction. Dana screeched. "You're evicting your own children?" Meredith stood on the gravel path in a soft gray sweater, mug in hand, steam rising. She didn't answer. She didn't flinch. She turned and walked back toward the farmhouse, the crunch of her boots the only reply they got. Inside the guest house, Dana unraveled. Clothes flew into duffel bags without folding, shoes thrown in pairs or not at all. Lipsticks rattled in a makeup bag like hailstones. Her sobs echoed down the hall, sharp and furious, the soundtrack of a woman who had never once been told no, in a way that actually mattered. Jason, meanwhile, leaned against the fridge with a coffee he hadn't paid for, and muttered to himself about legal recourse and optic. When Carson walked in to retrieve the charger he'd left behind, Jason didn't even look up. "I'm not getting evicted," he said. "I'm relocating. Voluntarily." Carson said nothing, just unplugged the charger and left. 10 minutes later he returned and gently took Dana's largest suitcase from her shaking hands. "Don't," she whispered. But he already had it. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't offer judgment, just carried it, down the steps, across the gravel, and placed it beside the passenger door of her BMW. "Thank you," Dana said softly, mascara streaking like watercolor in the mountain humidity. Carson nodded and walked away. Back inside the farmhouse, Meredith stood at the kitchen sink, slicing lemons for iced tea when Tina's Jeep rolled up the drive. She stepped out in jeans and a cherry-colored blouse, and held up a Tupperware container, like a peace offering. "Peach muffins," she said, grinning, fresh and celebratory. Meredith raised an eyebrow. "I read the county filing this morning," Tina continued, placing the container on the counter. "Told my husband you'd outlast him, always knew you'd win. Just didn't think it'd be this satisfying." Meredith smirked and pulled out 2 mugs. "Tea? Always." They sat on the porch while the wind carried the scent of damp earth and overripe plums from the orchard. In the distance, Dana's sobs faded into the slam of car doors. Jason cursed under his breath, something about legacy and lawsuits, but his voice was barely more than static now. At 11:02 a.m., Jason's SUV pulled out of the Guesthouse drive and stopped at the mailbox, like he might take one last look at what was never his. Meredith didn't watch, but Carson did. He stood at the edge of the porch, arms folded, until the dust cloud vanished down the gravel road. Inside, Meredith opened the drawer beside the mudroom sink and removed the keys to the guest house. They were still on the brass ring she'd bought 26 years ago. One for the front door, one for the back, one for the padlocked utility box Jason had once tried to cut open with bolt cutters. She walked across the lawn, the keys clinking softly against her palm. When she reached the porch, she paused, exhaled, and slid them into the lock. Click. The sound was quieter than she expected. Less triumphant, more restorative, like a bone sliding back into place. Delilah called later that afternoon to confirm the forwarding address had been changed. "Nothing else goes to that mailbox but yours and Carson's," she said. "Clean break." "Good," Meredith replied, watching the horizon. "Make sure they know it's final." She stood at the window that evening, Carson seated nearby sketching the mountains in charcoal. The sun dipped low, staining the treetops copper and gold. Far in the distance, a small puff of dust kicked up from the road, Jason's car disappearing for the last time. Meredith didn't wave, didn't smile, just breathed in, slow and steady, and finally, exhaled. The land spoke louder when it was quiet. The gravel no longer crunched beneath unfamiliar tires. No muffled arguments leaked from the guesthouse windows. No champagne corks, no slamming doors. Only birdsong, the sigh of summer wind in the poplars, and the steady sound of boots on soil. Meredith walked the property alone, one gate at a time. She paused at each threshold, fingers wrapping around the cool iron latch before letting it click shut behind her. The barn. The orchard. The rise where Hank once planned to build a gazebo they never needed. Every closure felt like punctuation. Sharp, final, earned. She carried a manila envelope tucked beneath her arm. Inside, the deed. Updated and filed. The Hollowell land, all 180 acres of it, listed now under just 2 names. Meredith Hollowell.
Carson Lee Hollowell.
No Jason. No Dana. No others. Not in ink, not in trust, not in legacy. She reached the spot near the barn, where the family used to gather on summer nights, fireflies blinking between mason jars, guitars playing out of tune. Hank had taught Carson how to tie a proper knot right here. Jason had once drunkenly tried to start a bonfire without clearing brush. Now it was quiet, purposeful. Reverend Luke stood waiting, a plaque wrapped in brown paper leaning against his leg. Meredith joined him without a word. Together, they kneeled and pressed the post into the soft earth, tamping it down with solemn force. When they peeled the paper back, the brass plate caught the sunlight. Hollow land established 1896 protected. Since 2025, Luke stepped back, brushing dust from his palms. "Think Hank would have liked it?" he asked. "He'd have helped me bolt it in," Meredith said, a hint of a smile tugging at her mouth. They didn't need to say more. Reverend Luke tipped his hat and walked back toward his truck, leaving Meredith standing alone in the hush of legacy finally secured. Back inside the farmhouse, Meredith sat at the desk where so many battles had begun, signing forms, sending notices, drafting limits. Now she signed one last document, Final Trust Amendment. It contained only one clause, irrevocable. No reversal, no contact. The lawyer would file it first thing Monday. As if summoned by some final gasp of hope, her phone buzzed once on the desk. Dana calling. Meredith stared at the name for a long moment. No photo, no warmth, just a name grown heavy with misuse. She pressed her thumb to the screen and held. Block number. Confirm. Silence. The email came in minutes later, from Jason. Subject line. What now? She read it once, twice. The message was short. Empty. Not angry. Not yet. Just rattled. What now? She typed only 2 words. You leave it, and sent it. That night, Carson returned from a supply run into town. New paintbrushes, a few sketch pads, and peaches from the roadside stand. He set the bag down on the kitchen table and looked around. The house felt different. Not newer, not cleaner, just quieter. Did you do it? He asked. Meredith opened the envelope and showed him the notarized deed. He took it slowly, his thumb brushing across the bolded names. His eyes lingered on the line where his stood beside hers. Carson cleared his throat. You didn't just win. Meredith looked up, one brow arched. You changed everything, he said quietly. She folded the envelope closed. No, she replied, reaching for his hand. We did. Outside, the sun slid behind the ridge. The new plaque gleamed like a secret finally safe. The ladder wobbled slightly as Meredith reached for the last panel. August sun poured across the roof like honey, blinding and heavy, but she kept her balance. One gloved hand steady on the rail, the other guiding the black pane into place. She wasn't waiting on anyone to do it for her anymore. Below, Carson stood with the new inverter box, wires coiled neatly in his arms. That's the last one, he called, squinting up at her. Meredith smiled behind her sunglasses. Good. Let them see us shine. By late afternoon, the farmhouse was off the grid, fully powered by the sun. No more bills. No more shared lines. Total independence. She watched as the system blinked to life in the laundry room, a soft hum vibrating through the wall like a heartbeat. Carson stepped back, wiped sweat from his brow, and cracked open a soda. You know what I like about solar? What's that? No one else gets to flip the switch. The farmhouse porch rail, long faded and splintering from years of weather, had fresh paint by sunset. Carson worked in smooth, quiet strokes, focused and methodical. The white gloss glowed in the golden hour light, restoring something that had once felt forgotten. Tina's Jeep kicked up dust on the gravel as she arrived with a cardboard box balanced on her hip. Inside, crisp linen curtains in soft creams and sage greens, wrapped in tissue paper. You said you hated the old ones, she said with a grin. I figured this place deserved something new. Meredith ran her fingers over the fabric. It does. The house felt different now. It smelled of lavender oil and clean wood. No voices raised, no slammed doors, no scent of Jason's cologne or Dana's high-end hairspray lingering in the air like ghosts. Meredith moved slowly through each room, fingertips grazing the edges of every windowsill. Dust no longer clung to them. The rooms no longer felt borrowed or braced for impact. In the guest bedroom, a single photo of Hank sat on the dresser, the only thing untouched during all the renovations. Meredith stopped there, her hand hovering over the frame, and whispered, "We did it, old man." In the dining room, Carson was installing the new camera system, every wire tucked cleanly behind the trim. Motion triggered, full perimeter. You'll get pings on your phone, he said, glancing up. Will you? Meredith asked. He nodded. You think I'm leaving you alone with all this? She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Delilah arrived just after 6, dressed in her usual blazer and boots, a manila folder tucked under one arm. Her eyes swept the porch, the gleaming new rail, the solar panels peeking above the roofline. "Damn," she said. "You really flipped it, didn't you?" Meredith led her into the sitting room. Delilah set the folder down on the side table and opened it to the last page. "Here it is. Final record of estate, notarized and filed. Trust is permanent. Ownership is sealed. No contest left. The house, the land, everything, it's all officially yours and Carson's. Legally, unshakably, and forever." Meredith signed the last confirmation with a pen she'd used on wedding invitations, trust documents, and finally, her freedom. Delilah watched her for a moment, then handed over a bottle of sparkling cider. "Thought you might want to celebrate without champagne." Meredith laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. Perfect. As twilight deepened, warm light glowed from every window in the farmhouse, light generated, not by bills or borrowed infrastructure, but by the sun itself. Meredith stood on the porch, sipping cider from a mason jar, listening to the cicadas rise. Carson joined her, freshly showered, his hair still damp, a blanket folded over one arm. He looked out at the land, silent for a long time. Then, in the softest voice he'd used yet, he asked, "Can I stay forever?" Meredith didn't look away from the horizon. That's the point. The tea steamed gently in Meredith's hands, the porcelain warm against her fingers as she settled into the wide wooden rocker on the back porch. She hadn't worn shoes. She didn't need to. The earth beneath her was hers, all of it, and it no longer trembled beneath someone else's expectations. The sky cracked open in shades of lavender and peach, stretching across the Appalachian ridge like a promise finally kept. A breeze moved slow through the grass, lifting the hem of her robe and tugging softly at the loose curl near her temple. Peace, she thought, wasn't quiet. It was earned. Carson sat cross-legged beside her on the porch floor, a thick sketchbook balanced across his knees. His charcoal moved slowly, almost reverently, across the page as he shaped the tree line, the gentle dip of the valley, the angled peak of the barn's tin roof. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The sound of pencil on paper was its own conversation, one built on trust and time, and shared survival. Behind them the farmhouse hummed with soft life. Tina's laughter floated out from the kitchen, warm and round, followed by Delilah's sharper cackle as she poured coffee. Someone turned on the radio. Faint country music, low enough to blend with the cicadas. The scent of frying eggs curled around the screen door, grounding everything in the comforting ache of normal. Meredith let her eyes drift across the property. The barn doors were shut tight. The guest house windows were dark and silent. The orchard shimmered faintly in the morning dew. There were no tire tracks in the gravel, no muddy boot prints on the walk, no voices raised in protest. Her name was on the mailbox. Her name was on the deed. Her name was on the future. No one else's. The phone buzzed beside her, a subtle tremor against the table wood. She glanced down. Unknown number. No voicemail. No urgency. Just the ghost of old tactics. She picked it up, held her thumb over the screen, and powered it off. When she set it back down, Carson looked up. Still trying. She nodded once, took a slow sip of her tea. "They think they can wear me down. And can they?" he asked, not as a child, but as a man who had watched every phase of her transformation. "No," she said. "They already lost." He turned back to his drawing, but not before she saw the small grin tug at the corner of his mouth. Delilah stepped out onto the porch a few minutes later, coffee mug in hand, sunglasses pushed into her hair. "I peeked at the mailbox," she said. "Still nothing from the court, but the county tax assessor sent you a thank you note." "For what?" "For not selling," Delilah said with a shrug. "Apparently you're the only family on this mountain that didn't cash out to developers." Meredith leaned back in her chair, eyes following the thin clouds dragging across the ridge. "They called it inheritance," she said quietly, "but it's never been that. It's always been home." Tina appeared behind the screen door, drying her hands on a dish towel. You want me to start some cornbread? Make the sweet kind, Carson called, without looking up from his sketch pad. You got it, baby. Meredith closed her eyes for a moment. She could feel the porch wood beneath her bare feet, the light brushing her cheeks, the old house breathing around her like it was alive again, not haunted, not heavy, just hers. Carson shifted beside her, holding up the sketchbook. What do you think? She looked. The drawing was soft, full of curves and light and quiet power. A landscape not just seen but known. I think you saw it better than I ever could, she said. He lowered the book and looked at her. You didn't just win. She turned toward him. You built something they can't take. Meredith reached over, brushed his hair gently behind his ear and exhaled. No, she said. I rebuilt what they never understood. A hawk circled high above the ridge, silhouetted against the light. Inside, Tina hummed. Delilah clicked through email. The stove popped once with heat. The porch was warm and full and finally safe. They celebrated his death. I honored his legacy and erased theirs.